So we're going to start with the detectives first. This will be part one of two of this little section right here. Part one is going to discuss the detectives and how they came across, and part two is going to discuss the witnesses, most notably some of the ones that you all are very familiar with and became very familiar with over time as well. But I want to always give this disclaimer. The law enforcement officers who protect our communities, I respect them dearly, and they're there to do their job. They're there to protect us. And even though that they are sitting in the courtroom on behalf of the state, I don't know them. They don't know me. However, I do not go against law enforcement, especially when they are just doing their job. That's what they do. Just as for me being a flight attendant as well as being a referee, even though that's a little different story from fans and players and coaches and whatnot. But I just want to always give that disclaimer because I think that we should always and try our best to follow the law accordingly. And they're just there to do their job, just protect you and I. As a result to this case right here, let's begin with Detective Belnap. So Detective Belnap comes in and very knowledgeable about his way of doing the case or explaining where he's getting to as far as what is a gang and defining that. And as he's going through his testimony, I'm following along the way. There was a lot of important information because, of course, that was the very, very first, one of the first few testimonies that we saw, if I'm not mistaken. And how he explained what a gang was, as well as talking about the three types of gangs, whether it was hybrid, whether it was non-traditional and traditional, it opens a lot of light into, okay, then this is what we are expecting. Um, I'm not naive that gangs do exist. It's just a fact of proving what a gang is. And in this reference right here, as pertains to this particular case, pertaining to YSL, if this is considered a gang. And my perception of Detective Belknap, pretty much when I first saw him, was okay, he's knowledgeable. He's explaining to us what we're looking for. Of course, District Attorney Love was asking questions, and it started to paint a story. And this is, like I said, this is from the initial, from when we are sitting in the courtroom for the first week or so in court. So, as I stated beforehand, I was never for the state or never for the defense. When I was coming in from a neutral standpoint, because I want you to tell me what I'm looking for, and then for me to connect the dots. And so, of course, when you hear something brand new, you are just listening to what they have to say because, like I said, I'm going by the facts. And that's what happened. So now we have three categories of how Detective Belknap in his testimony described what is a gang and the gang structure from, as I mentioned, hybrid, traditional, and non traditional. And like I said beforehand, for this particular segment, we're just going to talk about this detective's my first encounter with those who were coming to the stand who I thought were important, and then we'll talk about the witnesses. Sorry, we'll talk about the evidence, which we'll dive in deeper because that right there would give you some kind of understanding of how I was thinking. So Detective Belknap, of course, went first. He explained to what he wanted us to know about the different types of game. Now, when it comes down to Detective Dennis and Detective Gaither, I think those two were two great duos. Um, they are very knowledgeable for doing some work undercover and whatever their line of work was, as they were embedded within a community with some of the activities of different organizations that existed within the communities. And I say that only because of I don't know what a gang is particularly unless it's identified as. But as a respect to their line of work, that is what they were doing. They were embedded within the community and they were doing police work as far as gathering information as well as keeping the public safe. So Detective Dennis, I felt, was extremely, I'll say, more down to earth. He surprisingly is that type of person that you actually go to a basketball game with. And I'm not sure if he played basketball or not, but he looked like a basketball player. When I saw him, he looks like a basketball player. But he seemed like that he was more empathizing with wanting individuals to get their life right and understanding why are they on this track of doing whatever they do. And I saw the human side inside of him because I think he genuinely did care about individuals, but at the same time, he was there to do his job to keep the public safe and to not get things escalated. So he came across as that way. Detective Gaither, I thought was, she explained her background. I think she's from Chicago, if I'm not mistaken. And she explained why she got into law enforcement. It was a great background. I mean, anybody who's has a story on why they like to do things, I think that's perfect. And seeing those two duo as they were doing interrogation with these young men during this time, you had Detective Dennis, who was, I won't say laid back, but was more, a little bit more empathizing, just trying to figure things out. Don't lie to me, just tell me what's going on. Detective Gaither is a straight bullet. And that's just what she came across as. She was says, don't give me the BS. And I think that those two duo were perfect in how they did their work. However, we will dissect the evidence that they collected as it pertained to building up this case. But I do think those two made a good team. Um, Disclaimer: I think that those two should not have. They should have came in for a short period of time, and that's about it. I think that they were just too close to the case. As I mentioned, attorney District Attorney Love was too close to the case. And I think Detective Dennis and Detective Gaither, though they all knew information, but sometimes you're just so close to something that you need to have other people try to tell the story from an outside looking in. And so that's just my perspective of them. But those two presented, they came in. I never had any resistance towards either one of them because, like I said, though, I'm not coming in stating that I like this person, I didn't like this person, I like his testimony. My whole thing was I needed the state to present its case fairly. I needed the defense to counter that and to explain to me what are the holes, and then it's up to me to decide what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Period. So that's just my perspective of Detective Dennis and Detective Gaither. When it came down to Detective David Quinn, so David Quinn, of course, been in law enforcement for a very long time, and look, I just turned, well, I'm almost 40. So Detective David Quinn reminds me of McGruff the Crime Dog. I'm not sure if you all remember that, but that is who he reminded me of. Now, now sitting in a jury pool, you had some people rolling their eyes. You had some people who clearly did not like him. I'm just flat out just telling you that. And I guess his personality came across as arrogant for some people. For me, I looked at him as being knowledgeable about his line of work. However, we will dissect the evidence later on of what was presented. But his personality, when I was sitting there listening to him, because Detective David Quinn has a way of getting people to talk. And he's that type of person. I think he even explained that in court, that he makes them feel comfortable. And I can get that. I mean, working in the political arena for a very long time, you kind of master that a little bit. And then, of course, being a flight attendant, I generally do care about people. So I, I'm the kind of person you can go out here and have a good time with on my good days. Sometimes I want to be by myself. but, but Detective David Quinn clearly was that type of person where he gets people to talk by making them feel comfortable. He leans back in his chair, and I had anything wrong with him, but I know that there were some other jurors who did not like his personality. Who there was, you probably all couldn't hear it, but teeth smacking, eyes rolling. There was some sighs here and there when he came up to present, but hey, he was doing his job, so it was what it was. So that's how I describe Detective David Quinn. The Detective Hogan was quite interesting, only because of he reminds me of the Texas Ranger, where I think he came into the courtroom with a cowboy hat on and glasses around his neck, and very much particular about how he's going to present the evidence in court. And we'll get on Detective Hogan in full detail about some of the things that were collected and some of the things that were there's some inconsistencies that was in his statement, but he came across as a father, a grandfather who really does care about his kids and his family, and he treated folks that way. Um, to me, he was down to earth. To me, he provided information that kind of painted a picture of what he was working on. However, when it came down to some of the evidence, it was a little bit. There were some missing holes that just didn't make any sense because I'm sitting down, I'm saying to myself, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm like when I have my notepad, I'll write down important information, and then off to the side, I'll write questions. And if the defense, which quite frankly they were really good at, I commended the defense team for their questioning things that needed to be addressed. The state will, I'm sorry, the defense team will come in and whatever's going through my head, they pretty much 90% of the time they nailed it. The state, however, just bypassed it on many occasions and just missed the mark because I don't know if it was they didn't, what was their strategy, but if I'm questioning certain things in my mind over your testimony and the defense brings it up and the state really can't counter it, then I question how prepared you were, or were you thinking the same thing depending on the jury pool that you are trying to communicate with on a level to get a verdict that pretty much leaned towards you. So the defense team poked the holes in everything that the detectives were testifying to every time. When it comes down to Detective Viverito, Detective Viverito um, was pretty much at the center of his entire trial. And as I mentioned once before, Detective Viverito and Detective Underwood should have been one of the first few people that we listened to, period. I don't know the strategy for the state. I'm just curious to know what was their strategy. Why did they say these two individuals, these two women detectives at the very end? Why did they put them up in the very beginning? Because Attorney Steele pretty much gave us a blueprint, and he stuck to that blueprint, and it was on course. But the state, however, should have had Detective Belnap, who explained the gang structure, hybrid, non-traditional, traditional. This is what it encompassed. And then you should have had Detective Viverito, who was in the core of the investigation, explaining her knowledge, connecting what or piggyback off of what Detective Belknap was stating in order to paint a bigger picture. And then you have Detective Underwood, who comes in and kind of seals the deal. So now we have three detectives who are knowledgeable about gangs, who can paint a picture that would have paralleled with the defense, and then we're able to now navigate parallel. So this is one side, this is the other side. What we were getting was the defense was on course, and the state was just weaving in and out, just wasting time. And I don't know, but Detective Vivito, Detective Underwood did an important had an important role in this particular case, and it just didn't go well. Of course, towards the very end, as far as the verdict. But like I said, I don't question any of their tactics anyway, or their investigation. They're there to do their job, and they provided testimony for us to decide from their perspective what we should know, and that's the way I was going. But I thought when I saw Detective Dorito, okay, she's as she begins to speak, she tells us this what's going on, this is what's happening, this is my part in the investigation, this is what I was doing, and that was that. When it came to Detective Underwood, I was more alert only because of the knowledge that she had behind law enforcement, extensive law enforcement at that, and she knows the community. I'm a transplant here. I don't know ATL that well, but I'm learning Atlanta, the Atlanta metro area and surrounding areas as I travel around the state refereeing different sports games, and I'm understanding different counties and all that good stuff. But it's always good to have somebody who's a local, who is from that area, and they can tell you the history, the structure, and everything. When it came down to, I'm not sure you all remember, um, folks from the DA's office. You had Mike Sprinkle. Now, Mike Sprinkle, and I think he's the deputy district attorney, was quite interesting because I felt that the state itself brought him in to just stall. There's a word called filibuster in politics. You go in and someone just talks for a very long time just to kill time, and until a vote is rendered, um, for members to come in and to vote on a subject or a matter. And that's how I looked at this attorney, Mike Sprinkle. He just spoke about, he was like rehashing everything that we already have spoken about. And his placement in this whole case didn't make any sense. I remember he comes in, and one of the jurors who was sitting right beside me just nudged me and politely said, "Do you see all the paper and the notebooks that's in front of him?" And so I chuckled off to the side because I was like, "Yes, I do see it." And I just felt like it was nothing but a filibuster. The state needed time to go in, and this is when I said that they were not prepared. You're asking the jurors to sacrifice an entire year. And if I, which I have before, presented in front of individuals, in front of a group or a panel, if I'm not prepared, someone's going to say something to me, and it's going to be embarrassing. Of course, we couldn't say much, but to me, when the state brought Deputy District Attorney Mike Sprinkle, it was just a waste of time. There was no need to have him present, um, or give a testimony in the courtroom whatsoever. I think we also had, um, the gang unit from Gay's office. I think Reeves Hiles, if I pronounce his name correctly, and I think he was instrumental. And this is when, for those who work in government and those who are embedded in government on different levels, we know about technology. We know about a lot of how we can extract information. So what we've learned, which some of you all probably knew, and I knew about this too as well, you need a subpoena. The only app that we know that exists that is hard to get a court order on is WhatsApp app. And we use that overseas, and anybody who know folks overseas, they use that because it's a great way to communicate. But WhatsApp app needs a court order, and it's not in the United States jurisdiction. So therefore, any information that you communicate on there, as so, the message disappears or it's encrypted, and that's the main thing. And like I said, we'll go into the evidence as far as the encryption and the tracking, the cell phone towers, and all that good stuff. But he came and Reeves Hiles comes in and explains about the information that was extracted or what information that they could comb through as far as evidence. We know that Facebook, anytime you send a message via Facebook, whether or not you um, delete that message or not, it can be tracked down, traced, and brought into court. Tells the time, location, tells you any information that you know, any pictures that you have sent, all those good things. And that's when you start to wonder, okay, then how safe are your phones? And hence how the state tried to articulate or try to show us that these individuals would call but not leave a trace or trail. And that's something that we'll talk more about later on. So he was very instrumental. Reeves Hiles was very instrumental as far as how law enforcement is able to get a could subpoena the phone companies, could subpoena social media, um, and also get a warrant and able to get information from an individual and use that to bring a case against them. So all these detectives that I've named, including the attorneys that were involved, were instrumental for this part, but we're going to get down to nitty gritty as far as the evidence that was presented. And on that note, part two, we're going to discuss some of the witnesses and how I view them. And then the fifth episode, will break things down specifically as far as the evidence that was presented, the inconsistencies, the indictments, as well as where the state pretty much started to mess up with this court case. So we'll talk to you soon.